This war with Iran sets up a unique, maybe unprecedented situation for all of us as American citizens, as voters, as active members of the Republic. Never before in the history of any democracy on earth, let alone here in the United States of America, have we ever entered into a war with so little credible information about what we're doing, why, and what it will all lead to. There are very few things that we know for certain so far, but we know this, that the justifications that President Trump has offered for launching the war not only contradict each other, but contradict themselves. For example, Trump's claim that Iran was a week away from having weapons grade nuclear material and on the verge of having the missile technology to deliver it to our shores. Not only do experts agree that both of these points are totally untrue, but remember that just 6 months ago, Trump was so adamant that we had, quote, completely and fully obliterated Iran's nuclear capability that Pete Hegseth fired a top US general because the Defense Intelligence Agency that he headed up had contradicted Trump.
Seth on Friday fired the general who angered President Trump over his damage assessment of U.S. strikes on Iran. Officials gave no reason for the firing of Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz, head of what's called the Defense Intelligence Agency. It follows a June assessment by the DIA that strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities had only set their nuclear program back by a matter.
But not only is this all inherently contradictory, but it's further contradicted by Marco Rubio's explanation that actually we're at war with Iran because Benjamin Netanyahu sucked us into it.
If we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would.
Which is itself contradicted by Vice President J.D. Vance and his repeated assertions that Trump is who's determining what's happening, all on his own. And what about Trump's assertion that this is really all about regime change, that we're merely setting things up for Iran's own people to overthrow their government?
Take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want.
If that was the strategy all along, let's not forget that mere weeks ago, when Iranians were protesting in the streets over dire economic conditions, Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, Iranian patriots keep protesting, take over your institutions, help is on the way. One of 8 times that he did that. And they did. They followed through. And that led to the Iranian government murdering an official toll of 3,117 people. But independent analysts suggest that the death toll could be over 36,000. And as the Yale historian Tim Snyder points out, these are the very people, the most motivated and courageous pro-democracy Iranians who would have been the vanguard of a new government. So Trump literally called for our strongest potential allies and bridge to a future in Iran to sacrifice themselves. He assured them that we had their back, except it was actually coming a month later when they had all already been murdered. And what about the most troubling one of all? What about the distinct possibility that Trump launched this war not to back up the protesters or protect us from phantom nuclear weapons or even to support an allied government with a sketchy leader like Netanyahu, but rather because of a personal grudge? Not just that, but a grudge built on a deranged and debunked and pathological conspiracy theory. He posted on Truth Social that, quote, Iran tried to interfere in 2020-24 elections to stop Trump and now faces renewed war with the United States. Is that the cause and effect here? Let's not forget that this is the second time that we've launched a deadly military operation on the basis of Trump's conspiracy allegations, since he similarly claimed falsely that Venezuela had interfered in the 2020 election. And this one is equally bogus, especially since the 2020 effort seems pretty clearly to have been meant to suppress Democratic Party voting and to favor Trump. This one is disturbing because it's not only, therefore, self-contradictory, but it seems to be launching an entire globe-shaking war to set up a pretext for suppressing our own midterm elections this November. What's hard about all these conflicting and contradictory justifications is that they sit atop the Trump lie machine, which has recently veered into a new form of lying that I profiled in my That's Bullshit segment on the Political Rehab show last week. I called it the impossible lie. This is a lie that cannot be true because it breaks the laws of math. and is therefore merely an Orwellian test of subjugation on the order of 2 plus 2 equals 5. But that's not all the challenge here, because despite all of the internal contradictions and lies and fog of war uncertainty, there remains a chance that there could be a good outcome here. That's the somewhat more pragmatic view that figures could emerge and create an Islamic Republic 2.0, like Tom Friedman suggests, like a much less threatening version. Or we could even end up with a functional and somewhat friendly Iranian regime. That we could look back in 5 years or 10 years from the vantage point of a world that's fundamentally changed and say, this was ultimately for the good. And this kind of tension and nuance and complexity is exactly what we do not excel at in American politics these days. And that's what makes the challenge of this moment so unique. We have to be able to deal with two coexisting realities. On the one hand, we have an illegal war launched against the Constitution with no congressional authorization and with almost no attempt at justification to the American people who are in charge via our duly elected representatives. Almost no mention in the State of the Union speech, no run-up of administration officials explaining the situation in depth, which they at least tried to do in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, even though they were frequently lying. No primetime address or fireside chat. Only this mess of incoherent and suspected motivations. On the other hand, there's no denying that, as former Associated Press Middle East editor Dan Perry said on this show last week, if we could achieve a regime change in Iran to a government that stops funding terrorist groups and destabilizing the region and murdering its own people, that would be a good thing. And I should note that Dan is currently with his family in a bunker in Tel Aviv. He's among those paying the price for the slim hope that this will turn out well, which is why there are two things we need to hold on to in the coming weeks. First, we need to burn into our brains the uncertainty that we're living with right now, because hindsight is 2020. We tend to so easily forget how little we knew before the fact. That's especially true when we have a government aided and abetted by a right-wing media apparatus that's relentlessly trying to etch-a-sketch our brains about what came before. We can't allow the 2020 hindsight fallacy to erase the incredible risk that we're facing right now and the incoherent stupidity with which we launched this war. The second thing we must hold on to is a glimmer of hope. As I wrote on Substack, from the moment Trump launched this war, many commenters have invoked the 1997 film Wag the Dog to charge that this is all about creating a diversion from the political disasters that Trump himself created: high costs, a sputtering economy, the Epstein files, his paramilitary murdering Americans in Minnesota, and every other piece of pain that he's inflicted in his second term as president. And the key thing to remember is that it's not working. As of today, 1 in 5 Trump voters from 2024 regret their choice. And that includes nearly a quarter of non-MAGA Republicans who wish they had a do-over on their vote. If Trump was hoping for a rally around the flag effect, it hasn't happened. About 60% of us already disapprove of this war with Iran and say we don't trust that Donald Trump has a plan. And there's one more glimmer of hope here. Almost 2/3 of Americans want Congress to approve any further military action. A similar majority of Americans blame Donald Trump's tariffs for their high costs and want Congress to rein him in. The fact that we have a rubber stamp Congress is increasingly infuriating American voters. And that's why Democrats right now have a 10-point advantage on the generic ballot. So there's a real hope that in 8 short months, we might be able to get rid of a lot of these lackeys and get a Congress that will actually be the independent branch of government that the Constitution envisioned and that actually responds to what the American people want.